Next up, funding DIY. EB Research Partnerships multi-stakeholder platform powered by Venture Philanthropy. Michael Hund and Ryan Jankitis are going to talk funding, just like David mentioned early on in terms of exploring venture philanthropy. Joining us is Michael Hund, who joined EBRP in 2017 and served previously as Director of Development for the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, leading a $100 million Curing Cancer Now campaign. For a decade, he served in leadership at Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Fund and received his MBA from Yale University and a degree in philosophy from the University of Kansas. Ryan Jankitis is Global Product Manager for Envision Engineering Team at Amazon Web Services. The Envision Engineering Team solves customers' most pressing business problems by demonstrating the art of the possible with AWS. Ryan has 20 years of experience in enterprise software, development, sales, and management, helping the largest governments, nonprofits, and education organizations across the world utilize AWS to achieve their stated missions. Starting first, Michael will give us a deep dive into EB, the EB Research Partnerships mission, their focus on collaboration, and insights on the venture philanthropy model. Ryan will then take us through this collaboration, how this collaboration turned into a groundbreaking product for the entire EB community and beyond. So welcome to Data DIY, Michael, and we'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Christian. And first off, just a big thanks to Christian and the whole Global Genes team, for your continued leadership in rare disease and convening us to discuss these very important topics that we're gathered to discuss. Also, a thank you to CZI for being big supporters of this event and the rare disease community. So, in addition to EB Research Partnership, I have another really important role. I am the dad of 3 daughters. I'm a very proud girl dad. And last week, I was working on this presentation. My oldest daughter, Isabella, is 4 years old, and she said, "Dad, what are you working on?" And I described to her, what we were gathered here today to help people that battle really challenging sickness and disease. And she was excited about that and had really good questions. And she looked through my presentation, and she was quiet for a minute. She said, "Dad, this is really, really boring. It needs to be more exciting." So once my ego recovered from the blow that it was just delivered by a 4-year-old genius, I said, actually, you might be right. So because of Isabella's feedback, we decided to start with a video today. So let me see if we can get this to work. Thank you.
Adversity, that's where heroes come from, and they come in all shapes and sizes, obviously. And didn't set out to be one, but they are now.
My name is Eli Meyer. I am 6 years old. I'm just a regular kid, but I have epidermolysis bullosa. You can call it EB. It's easier. EB is a rare condition. Sometimes it hurts.
Eli was adopted from China when he is 4 years old.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Aha!
Our family knew he had EB, but that didn't make a difference. Eli is a superhero to me. It makes me sad when people stare or point at him, and sometimes they can say things that are really hurtful.
I tell people I was born different, but we are all born different, and that's great. We can all learn from each other.
We want people to know if someone looks different than you, instead of staring, they should come say hi.
Hi.
I hope that when people see our shirts, they'll take a minute to stop and learn more about Eli and EB. I think if we all come say hi, we can do a lot of good things together.
I want to teach you about EB.
EB?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys have a wonderful day.
You too.
The more we understand each other, the better the world will be. Some people say my skin is like the wings of the butterfly because it can break easily. Butterfly wings are fragile, but they also help them fly. I may have EB, but I'm going to keep on flying.
Eli is amazing. For him to have this idea and let people know that it's okay when you see someone different, it's a huge thing, and it's very courageous. When you see the intense pain that these kids go through, the baths and the bandages, and it's about as hard a thing to watch as anything I've ever witnessed in my life. This is a big mountain that they have to climb every day, and it's hard not to want to dedicate a large portion of your life to doing whatever you can to help. A simple, small word like that, 2 letters, it can smash down barriers. So me and Eli want you to come say hi. Join us at ebresearch.org. Please, thank you.
So I made a promise to Eli and Lily that everywhere we went around the world that we would continue to gather highs and try to change the world 2 letters at a time. I know there's a live stream of this event, and Eli and Lily are in fact tuned in. So what I'm going to ask for your help is, on the count of 3, if you guys can say hi, Eli and Lily, as loud as possible. Can you do that? Can you help me out with that? Okay, great. Hi, Eli and Lily on 3. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Eli and Lily. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Just so I get a sense of the room, just by a quick show of hands, raise your hand if you're familiar with, before this video, familiar with epidermolysis bullosa or EB. Great. It's more than I expected. And just by a quick show of hands, raise your hand if your organization has experience with venture philanthropy or has been, beginning to begin and engaging with venture philanthropy. Okay. And then lastly, raise your hand if your organization is undertaking any sort of big data initiative. Okay. And finally, raise your hand if you've had really good barbecue while in Houston, Texas. Not as many hands as need to be up. Well, I'll jump right in. And just to give you a little bit of a story about what motivates us, what those people with EB face every single day. So this is my friend Brady, actually originally from not too far from where this conference room is. And every day Brady wakes up and has wounds and scrapes from the night before. His parents walk into his room and begin a process that is hours and hours of bleach baths and bandaging. And then, once that process is done, he has a host of doctor's appointments from his clinician to PT and OT just to be able to walk and eat and breathe sometimes. And then he comes home and he goes to bed, and he does that all over again the next day. And for us in EB, there's been a tremendous amount of progress that we're going to talk about today. But the reality is that, parents who have a child with EB, the best treatment that they have is the same lotions and skin creams that we get at our local CVS or pharmacy, right? There's no approved FDA treatments. So in a lot of ways, you could look at that and say that's a barrier, that's challenging. But I think we at EB Research Partnership, we look at that as motivation. That's a problem worth solving for Eli, for Brady, for all the people in the world that battle EB. So why was the organization started? I think like many of the organizations that are represented here today, quite simply, it was a group of parents who the first time they heard about EB was when their child was born with sheets of skin missing, and they were in the NICU. Within moments of birth, something that is usually very happy and joyous became very, very scary. And all they wanted to do was save their children's life. So there was the Silver family in New York. There was the Fulmer family on the West Coast. And they decided that they were both raising money for research on each coast. And they wanted to come together and collaborate and join forces because they knew they would be better together. Around the time the 2 organizations came together, Jill and Eddie Vedder of the band Pearl Jam, their close personal friend, which was the Fulmer family, they had learned about EB for the first time, and Ed used his platform as the singer of a big rock band to dedicate his life to raising awareness for this cause. And we feel so fortunate and so lucky that quite literally our microphone and our stage has gotten that much bigger. He's really taken this on, and not only, as you can see from the video, not only just EB, but really advocating on behalf of all those rare diseases. I'm very thankful to have him. We'll talk about the specific components of this, but what is our model based on? Our model is really based on 3 pillars, trying to keep it as simple as possible. Number 1, aggregating the largest data set imaginable to drive advanced acceleration in the community that we serve. Now that's bringing patients together and aggregating data, industry together, as well as academic medical centers we work with. Number 2, building a collaborative research network. I smiled during the previous presentation because we all know publish or perish, and I smiled even more when there was a question asked, how do you get universities and academic medical centers to make the contracting process move faster? I think that is the question, right? And one of the things that we start to think about how we can solve this is incentivizing academic medical centers to work together in a collaborative network. And then finally, building a diverse impact portfolio to give us as many shots on goal as possible. We'll talk about our venture philanthropy model, but the idea is that we don't know where a cure is going to come from. We don't know where the most advanced life-saving treatment is going to come on. So we feel just an investor would, just as your 401k or any investment portfolio you have, to have a diverse array of ranging from gene therapy to exon skipping to protein replacement, and funded in a unique way that is our venture philanthropy model. Now, when the organization started back in 2010, like many of us that represent rare diseases, the research landscape was really bleak. There was at best 2 clinical trials, not a lot of research being done. Since that time, we started raising funds in 2011. We've raised $35 million. We've funded 65 research projects. And what we've seen as a result of the impact is we have more than 12 times the amount of clinical trials than when we first began. Now, to be clear, we've got a long way to go. There's still no FDA-approved treatment, so by no means are we satisfied. We know there's an incredible amount of work ahead of us. But what gives us hope is that within the next year, we'll most likely see 4 final phase 3 clinical trials in EB. So ourselves, the organization, the community is incredibly hopeful that we'll see our first FDA approval in EB. Every single one of those 65 projects was funded under our venture philanthropy model. We've evolved the venture philanthropy model a little bit within the last 18 months, where we've actually started to form our own companies to start answer the question, how can we move faster? How can we rally the community around treatments that can get into the hands of patients as quickly as possible? And then all those funds that have been raised, nearly 90% of every single dollar that's raised goes directly towards research. And I think that's an important distinction. There's a lot of organizations doing really good work. We're not an advocacy lobbying organization, patient care organization. There's another organization that does that really well. So we want to be laser focused on funding research that's going to get into the hands of patients as quickly as possible. So last year was a groundbreaking year for us, a record-breaking year. Just to give you a sense, last year, $5.5 million in projects funded, 21 different projects in 6 different countries. And again, that ranged from exon skipping to gene editing to protein replacement therapies to biobanking projects. So really a diverse portfolio of the things that we fund. So we had this idea that things will move much faster if we can have collaboration and incentivize and inspire academic medical centers to work together. So back in 2015, we started something called the EB Clinical Research Consortium, which is a group of 21 of the leading academic medical centers, centers of excellence doing work in EB. And we fund each and every one of these universities with the condition that our funding is used to work on a shared data set. That means that the check does not go out unless that university agrees to play nice in the sandbox with the other universities and in fact share that data and load it up to a centralized platform. Again, so you can start to see some roots of the business model, which is creating financial incentives to change behavior. An example of this is in 2015, 3 universities came to us: Stanford University, University of Colorado, and Columbia University, a nice swath of the country. And twice a year, we do a call for grant applications from the research community. So all 3 universities applied to use IPS gene editing technology as an approach for EB. Now, they applied independently, not knowing about each other's work. And the chair at that time, Dr. Al Lane from Stanford University, was the MD chair of our scientific advisor board. He came to EB Research Partnership and he said, hey, I see an opportunity here. You have 3 universities with different levels of expertise, all applying to use the same technology in EB. I've got a crazy idea. What if you went back to these universities and you said, we'll fund you and fund your important work and projects contingent on you forming your own consortium called the IPS Cell Consortium and working together? And again, these funding amounts are not only significant funding amounts, but the funding really doesn't exist outside of patient groups in many rare diseases. We know that. So it creates a leverage situation where if you are the funder, you can ask for things like this. And why do we ask for it? We ask for it because we want to see a cure as quickly as possible for EB, and we know people working together will get that cure much quicker. So in 2015, the IPSL Consortium was born with those 3 universities coming together. We had a call with the chairs of the 3 universities working on this project about 6 months ago. And what the data they reported back is the time that they started the IPSL Consortium with preclinical work to get into a clinical trial, that process will be 5 years. And we asked, what would that process would have looked like if it was any one university working together? And they said, bare minimum 15 years to take this discovery into a lab, into clinical trials with one university doing alone. Why is that important? That's a decade faster. And when your mission is to save the lives that battle something like people that battle something like EB every single day, that's a significant amount of time, just with 3 universities collaborating. Imagine if you can get 20 or 30, and it moves quicker. And you create incentives where, what we found, and I guess in some ways this is a great irony, what we found is that with those 3 universities working together, you start to defy publish or perish because they've actually received more publications, more interest from commercial partners, grants from the Department of Defense. And one of the things the Department of Defense grant really highlighted with this group, the IPSL Consortium, said we love the idea that your 3 universities working together. So, collaboration not only makes things move faster, but creates new funding streams, new interest for these universities. And I would argue what we found in multiple myeloma was, in fact, that it creates more publications, which is oftentimes things that motivate these researchers. If you work on a large-scale data project or a consortium, you actually start to publish more. And we saw this in myeloma with the COMPASS study. The 20 universities that participated at the ASH conference every single year started to publish more than they had previously on this collaborative project. So again, thinking about what the problems are, thinking about what the barriers are, and trying to come up with models that start to solve that. So for us, the key of our model is venture philanthropy. And by no means did we invent venture philanthropy. It's something that the Rockefeller Foundation has talked about for a long time. Cystic fibrosis, of course, with Vertex, I think was the biggest success story of venture philanthropy. But I would make a strong case that as an organization, we're unique in the sense that it's institutionalized in every single piece of funding that goes out the door. And I talked about the Silver family earlier. Alexander Silver, who's father of a young boy with EB, co-founder and chairman, he's a graduate of HBS, runs a private equity fund. And in the beginning, when the organization started writing checks to these universities, he just simply didn't understand why you wouldn't ask for any share of commercialization or any equity. It doesn't exist in any other industry from nonprofits. So the premise started with that question, and the model has really been refined and built ever since then. So, for those of the not familiar with venture philanthropy, really try to break it down simply. So how does it work? We're a 501c3 nonprofit, just like many of you in the room. So we go out, we raise money from donors, supporters, foundations. Once we raise that money, we have a call for applications twice a year, once in January, once in June. So we say anybody with a groundbreaking and innovative idea in EB, academic medical center, private company, public company, doesn't matter. If you have a great idea in EB, apply to us for funding, right? And I think, the last 2 years alone, we've seen exponentially increased applications from companies, private companies, companies looking to start up, clinical trials. So the good news is the stages of the research is getting later and later. But that becomes a challenge for an organization because that means the funding requests are higher and higher. But we've really seen that increase exponentially. So once we get those applications in from the research and scientific community, we have a scientific advisory board that reviews every single application. Now, this is really important for us as an organization, that the scientific advisory board is independent from myself, board of directors. We make decisions on funding purely on scientific merit. And I think one thing that's interesting about our scientific advisory board, it's not just dermatology clinicians. It's not just PhD researchers with specialties in EB. We have people who are hospital administrators, PhDs who work in for-profit commercial labs, people from other diseases, even outside of dermatology, to really holistically look at these applications and review them when they come in. Our scientific advisory board then makes a recommendation to us at EBRP. We always fund just quite simply on funds available, highest rated science, whether, again, it's company or academic. What's important to us is the highest quality science. Now, at that point, when we approve funding, the organization changes drastically from a traditional nonprofit. When we decide to approve funding for an organization, then we become venture capitalists. We call ourselves venture capitalists for a cause. And it's incredibly important because in that moment, a check is going out the door to a university. Would Google or insert the name of any big venture capital fund just say, here's the check, we hope for the best, and well, we'll see you in a couple years, hopefully? Absolutely not. It doesn't exist in any other industry. So at that point, we structure and negotiate deals with academic medical centers, with companies, with an industry partner, and we're agnostic and we're open, and we'll walk through some of those steps, but it could be that we're negotiating equity in IP. It could be that we're negotiating milestone payouts. It could be that we're negotiating shares in a company that's either pre-money valuation or publicly traded, right? And then when those projects are commercially successful, that revenue comes back to the organization, right in the 501c3 to fund more research and start a sustainable cycle to continue to raise new revenue streams until a cure for EB is found. So let's talk about how we define venture philanthropy for us. So we really see ourselves not only as our shareholders and stakeholders being patients, but we see that we're solving a need of de-risking early stage investments, right? And when you serve a rare disease community, it's incredibly important because, quite simply, many of these clinical trials, much of this research would just not get done without funding. There's brilliant minds out there that want to do this work, but you need to de-risk these early preclinical projects because they're at a point that they're not of interest to a pharmaceutical company or publicly traded company yet. The model hasn't been proven for many of these diseases. So we're agnostic in structure. I mentioned this. We're willing to work with a company or a university tech transfer office to say, how can we create a win-win? Whether that's guaranteed ROI or milestones or negotiating equity, we're open and we're agnostic. We also do seek the ability to move IP forward if a company or university decides to shelf it. And this is incredibly important and was a good lesson learned out of personal experience of funding a really groundbreaking clinical trial in EB, seeing that acquired by a very large pharmaceutical company, and it's no fault. I'm not passing any blame. It's just the reality of how pharmaceutical companies work. They have a different priority or a higher value drug that they're going to pursue that. So then one becomes put on a shelf. From that experience, we realized that there was a treatment that could have been really beneficial for the EB community, but was sitting on a shelf somewhere in a pharmaceutical lab. We wanted to prevent that from ever happening again. So there's different terminologies for it, disruption license, but the idea is really quite simple. With everything we fund, we negotiate a term that says, if you don't move this forward, or if you sit on it, we at EB Research Partnership have the right to pull it out of the academic medical center, to pull it out of the company and move forward with it on our own, particularly if we think that has value for patients. We're constantly weighing conflicts of interest, and I think it helps having an independent scientific advisory board that's rating and funding purely on science. And we're transparent. You can go on our website, see every single piece of research that we fund, every single dollar amount that we go in, whether it's a company or an academic medical center. Incredibly transparent. We have the highest ratings on GuideStar and Charity Navigator for fiscal transparency and responsibility. So Venture Philanthropy 101. Time is our greatest asset. If you are a parent or a person with EB, there is a constant sense of urgency that should carry with you every single day and with everything that you do. Time is valuable, so let's move quickly. The nonprofit model is broken, right? We see 501c3 as a tax status, not a business model. There's quite literally no other industry that funds and does not ask for anything in return or to participate in commercialization. We really want to change that. And again, with your patient as shareholder, you're advocating on behalf of patients. And what we've learned is that not only are you creating funding and a new return and revenue stream, but you now have a seat at the table when we get into further stage research and things like pharmacoeconomic discussions happen and drug pricing. We're not just the advocacy organization who's lobbying on the Hill. We are investors in these companies, and we represent the patient, so we have a say in the decisions and actions that they take. That changes the dynamic, the traditional dynamic between patient advocacy groups and pharmaceutical companies. So again, we talked about this. There's really no other industry that just hopes for the best when they write checks. And venture philanthropy benefits all parties. Researchers get funding. We de-risk early stage investments to get them to a point that is of interest to commercial parties. And patients get treatments that they deserve more quickly than if we were just funding it and not participating and having some say in what happens to those clinical trials and how fast that they move. Must-haves. An IP or product that can be commercialized. I think the way that this actualizes and the type of research that we fund, that means that we do fund preclinical work. We prefer to fund clinical trials, but we don't fund really, really early bench science. And the reason we don't is because what we ask for, one of the conditions we ask for researchers around the world that apply, is we want to see something that has a path to commercialization in the next 3 to 5 years. So again, there has to be some market consideration for the type of research that we fund. Independent third-party validation done by our scientific advisory board, incredibly important component for anybody thinking about a venture philanthropy program, particularly in rare disease. Many of our organizations are patient-founded or parent-founded, and you never want to be in a position where you're making judgments on venture funding because of a personal connection. So it's really, really important to have independent third-party validation. And again, that protects everybody. That protects patients, the organizations, and also the people that you're funding. Nonprofit commanding market presence, we talked about this, but the conversations that we have in the EB market are very different than traditional advocacy groups. We're not having we'd like you to see this, and we're going to stand in front of the FDA and advocate. We're willing to do all those things, but the conversations that we're having are decision-making conversations at the same seat at the table as other investors, because that's exactly what we are, and we wanted to be respected and treated in that way. Investment structuring expertise. Anybody thinking about starting a venture philanthropy program, it's not easy. It's very difficult. Whether it's somebody on your board that is in finance or has venture or private equity experience, whether it's having a staff member, whether it's having just a really good attorney, you need to have somebody with finance experience, because once you kind of wade out into the waters, we'd like to think there's no sharks when it comes to rare disease, but this quite simply is not the case. So you need people with financial experience that are also passionate and committed about the cause, because I think there is a happy medium into hardcore deal structuring and negotiation and just wanting to see something get into the hands of patients as quickly as possible, and being a good partner. We call ourselves benevolent investors, or again, venture capitalists for a cause, so we don't want board seats. We don't want to slow down the process of any academic medical center or company that we fund. We just want to see it get into the hands of patients as quickly as possible. And number 5, really the most important, I would argue, of all of these is really good legal expertise and legal advisors. There's a group of attorneys and lawyers that have expertise and specialists in venture philanthropy, but you really need to make sure that you find somebody that works for your organization, that also understands your community, and is willing to put in the time, because a lot of times, particularly with academic medical center contracts, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. It takes a lot of time to hear back, and then it's a constant back and forth of negotiation. So you need somebody that's relentless, but also understands the unique nature of venture philanthropy. Why is EB right for venture philanthropy? And I would make a strong argument that many of these apply to many other rare diseases in this room. Number 1, EB is monogenic. It's a 1-point mutation that we know. We have a target. We can see it in our sites. To think that we can and will cure EB is not science fiction. It's becoming science. And you hear leading researchers around the world say this. So we have it in our sites. What better thing to wake up every single morning and accelerate towards? Methodologies on how to treat the condition are now in advanced clinical trials, so we're learning in larger scale patient populations. For us in EB, it's easy to observe if it's working, which has made us a prime candidate for gene editing. On the surface of the skin, you can see something as opposed to effects on internal organs. There's a long history of protein therapies and treatments that make the FDA at least aware of some of these treatments that are coming down the pipeline. It's a large enough patient population. There's about 30 to 50,000 patients in the US. 500,000 worldwide, so it's large enough to have commercial interest. And then things like gene editing, protein replacement, they have indications much greater than just EB. Gene editing is a platform technology that can start in EB and be used for many of the rare diseases that we all serve. So what does the venture philanthropy life cycle look like? EBRP raises funds. We look at early stage medical investments. We find a commercial partner to take it forward into clinical trials. A product or treatment is developed. Funds come back to the organization, and we do it all again. This looks very similar to a traditional venture model or an angel investor model, where small amounts of funding, the goal is not to go and ride the company to completion. The goal is to start a little bit of an incentive and a flame that will build a bigger organization or a bigger product to de-risk those early stage investments, to get them to the bigger commercial partners that can really find success, and then get the funding back to the organization to continue the model and do it again. So just quickly, 3 cases in venture philanthropy. Number 1, in 2015, we had made a $500,000 investment at a university for a gene therapy treatment. Shortly after, within a year and a half or 2 years after we made that investment, there was a publicly traded pharmaceutical company that showed interest in that IP from the university. So they acquired that IP from the university, showing interest in that product. At the time that they acquired that IP, the IP was something that we had an equity stake in. So we exchanged our equity stake for shares in the company that we immediately sold and liquidated and generated a $3 million return. So within a 2.5, 3-year time span, we took a $500,000 investment. We got a 6x return, raised that $3 million, pumped it right back into the foundation to continue to fund more research until we find a cure. And we took something that was sitting in a lab, we're able to fund it, get it into commercial partner, and now this specific example is something that's in a phase 3 clinical trial and is one of the things that we have a lot of hope for being approved for patients with EB. Case study number 2, this goes back to the iPS Cell Consortium, the collaborative between the 3 universities that came together and are moving much quicker. That iPS Cell Consortium is working on a gene editing technology using iPS cells. We invested in that technology for EB, but part of our contracts is we don't ask for just an equity stake in EB. We ask for an equity stake outside of field. Now, what that means is that that platform technology of gene editing can be used for thousands and thousands of other diseases. EBRP has a stake in that use of IP in other diseases. So you really see the model evolving, which means if that technology is used in other diseases and commercialized and monetized, in theory, if that happens, we can take revenue and funding from other diseases, put it back into our foundation to fund EB until it's cured. So you're unlocking new sources of revenue even beyond the disease itself. Finally, this is something that you can read a lot about. It just happened last year. In 2018, EBRP awarded a $5 million grant for an exon skipping therapy for exon 73 mutation in EB. The company ProQR, publicly traded company, great company, but they just decided that they had other priorities and other drug candidates that they wanted to focus more time and energy on. Because of that disruption license clause, we were able to go to ProQR and say, hey, look, remember the contract, if you're not going to do anything with this and it's not moving fast enough, we have the right to actually spin this out of this company and move forward with it on our own. It's exactly what happened. In 2019, Wings Therapeutics was started. That's a company that was started by EBRP. To be clear, I'm the CEO of EBRP. Thankfully, I'm not also the CEO of Wings Therapeutics. We hire a management team that can run this forward, and now this is something that's in a phase 1 clinical trial that otherwise would have been stalled or delayed. So we had the option to spin it out and move forward on our own. So in conclusion, what's the point of venture philanthropy? Rapidly accelerate treatments and cures for EB. That's our #1 goal and supersedes everything else. Create an innovative and sustainable fundraising model where we'll still do galas, we'll still do capital campaigns, we'll still have a major gift program, but it creates a new revenue model. Now, it's volatile, right? I don't budget every single year what my expected venture philanthropy returns happen. It's more the cherry on top that when it happens, it really helps. But it's really hard to predict in the same way that predicting the stock market is, right? So it's a pro and a con where it's a new sustainable funding model. However, it's an unpredictable one. So I want to be clear to this group as you think about this. Venture philanthropy never replaces clear fundraising strategy because if you start to rely on it too much, it's very unpredictable and could do damage to long-term growth and revenue for organizations. For example, last year was a year that was our highest fundraising year. We had 0 venture revenue. The year before, multi-million venture revenue. So you really don't know, and it's important to build those strategies in parallel with a venture philanthropy program to make sure that you're still fundraising in traditional ways. We see this as a really strong solution to build a bridge between patients, researchers, and industry. There's a win-win scenario where everybody at the table can get the incentives that they want to advance treatments, publication, funding, into clinical trials, and an active patient audience. And it's really our goal, which is exactly why we're here today, to not only pioneer this model in EB, but help take what we've learned in our model and pioneer it for all rare disease so it can benefit your organizations. And really, in conclusion, that's really important because this doesn't work for every type of disease. It's really well suited for rare disease. And why is that? If you're, name a breast cancer foundation, and you go to Rice University here in Houston, and you say, we're going to make $1 million grant to fund a breast cancer project at your university, we want 25% equity in your IP, they're going to laugh you out of Houston. And the reason is because there's plenty of funding available at the NCI, there's plenty of funding available at the NIH, there's lots of other foundations. So when the supply and demand are different than they are in rare disease, it doesn't work as well. All of us in rare disease, it works really well because many of us know this. Our foundations and organizations are often the only source of capital, and the capital doesn't exist everywhere. That means that creates leverage for our organizations to be a player in venture philanthropy as a model. So venture philanthropy has always been our biggest innovation, But then we started to ask questions that many of you asked. How can we leverage data to continue to innovate and drive more progress and accelerate treatments and cures for EB? We started asking that question. We met, he would never let me say this, but I call them the SEAL Team 6 of Amazon engineers. Ryan Jankaitis, who I'm proud to introduce right now, we were introduced to. We started talking about how to make the system move faster with the use of data. He is brilliant. He's been a gift to our organization, and I guess he would be the commander of the SEAL Team 6 of Envision Engineering and Amazon engineers. So at this point, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Great, great. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming out this morning. Two quick things before I dig in. One, always inspiring to see that video and to hear Michael's presentation about EB. Gets me going about this. Two, as somebody who was a teenager in the 90s, I never thought that Eddie would open for me, so I'm kind of feeling some pressure here. Hopefully I get through it okay? So my role at AWS, as was mentioned before, I lead a team called the Envision Engineering Team. What we do is help our customers innovate, specifically in the worldwide public sector, right? People come to us all the time and I have this great idea, I've got this core business problem, I think you guys can help, I think the cloud can help, but I'm just not quite sure, where to start, how to start, is it even technically possible to do what I want to do? And my team, working in a very agile, collaborative, iterative manner, come in and typically in about six to 8 weeks, we go from idea to solution. So we work really fast, we work really aggressively, but we also work really closely with our customers like EB Research and others. And really what that comes down to is that at AWS, we have a strong culture of innovation. It comes through our mechanisms, it comes through the people that we hire, it comes through the way we look at problems, okay? And one of the core areas we have that we look at internally is what we call the innovation flywheel, right? And basically on the bottom left, everything starts with ideas. I'm sure everybody has different ideas all the time, no matter how big, no matter how small. There are different ways we think we can help our patients, we can help our business, we can help the world, right? But ideas to reality, that's when you start to hit those barriers. In traditional IT, an on-premise data center, if you will, there's the procurement cycles, there's the licensing cycles, there's justification, there's actually setting up hardware. If you get into a point where I have a really cool idea, but it takes me 6 months to start, is that idea really cool anymore? And one of the interesting things and one of the values that we think we bring at AWS are the building blocks, the depth and breadth of services, the cloud model of paying for what you use when you use it and throwing it away when you're done. That enables that experimentation. If you can't prove your idea is feasible, if you never get off those starting blocks, that idea is useless in the long run. Right? And we try to practice that, working with these customers, working on the most unknown challenges. How can we experiment? And while you're experimenting, is it working? Right? Can you get that feedback to say, yes, your idea is viable. Yes, the technology is there. Or maybe, no, this just isn't going to work. Right? It is not hitting the goals. It's not hitting the outcomes that you're looking for. And in our practice, we meet every week. So every week, Michael got to hear me talk for 45 minutes as what we're doing, how we're going forward, what decisions we need to make. We take that feedback and start the flywheel over and over again. Right? So if you or your organization are struggling to execute on ideas, you might want to think about a cloud-based model, not necessarily saying ours is the best, but any way to approach that innovation to experiment faster. You'll get feedback faster, you'll validate those ideas faster, and that flywheel starts spinning. All right? So how do we create, oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So what is our culture of innovation all about? Again, it's all about generating ideas. We hire builders. My team, we have about 30 people on my team. When we hire those people, what's your past? Are you an innovator? Do you like to build? Do you like to dive deep and solve problems? Are you going to jump in feet first to do whatever it takes to solve this critical challenge? We have a bunch of internal mechanisms. You guys had a working backwards workshop yesterday with my peer Ben over there. Those are not just ideas. We put those into practice every single day, and you'll see that in a little bit of how we applied this to EB's challenges. Architecture. We have a concept called 2 pizza teams at AWS. 2 pizza team means if you have a team that's too big to share 2 pizzas, that team is too big, right? Too many voices, too many dependencies, too many questions, not enough ownership, right? So try to keep that team at 2 pizzas or less, and they own what they own. They are in total control of everything. They don't have to wait for team X, Y, Z to finish what they can do so they can move forward. That's a critical thing. I talked about cultures. We have 14 core leadership principles at AWS. And again, these aren't just things on the wall. These aren't just things that we put up in a flyer. We practice these every single day. And Michael, I'm sure, can attest afterwards, he probably heard a lot of these terms throughout our meetings. Think big, dive deep, invent and simplify. Those are core things that we practice every single day. And then decentralized authority. How do you own? Be in control of what you need to do. All right? Oh, sorry, I keep pushing that button. All right? But really where it all begins for us is we work backwards from the customer. And now if you see that in that single sentence up there, it looks really easy, right? No problem. I'll ask you what you want. Let's go build it. But if you take that approach, you're not really going to innovate. You're not going to get anywhere. As our CEO likes to say, Jeff Bezos, if you know it's going to work, you're not innovating, right? That's a solved problem. To paraphrase an old story, if you went up to somebody in the 1800s on a horse, say, how can we help your commute? They'd say, I want a faster horse. That's not innovating. That's not going to get you to the automobile, right? Our approach here is start backwards from the customer, but more importantly, how do we learn the business? How do we dive deep into what the real challenges of that business are? As you heard from my little bio, I don't come from a genetic background. I'm not a doctor. I'm a software guy. So working with Michael, I've tried to dive as deep as I possibly could into his business, into his mission, into his challenges, and the clinicians' challenges, and ask the right questions around that, right? Identify what that problem is and how you can move that forward. So coming out of that workshop that you all did yesterday, hopefully, there are a few things that we like to do. First is, what is the problem? If we cannot write in a single sentence what the core problem is, how are we going to move forward? If we can't agree on that, how are we going to move forward? And so the problem coming out of EB research was the process to identify genomic data associated with one or a group of phenotypes doesn't really exist, right? Different institutes spread across the world, not sharing, not playing nice. We've heard that a few times this morning. How can we solve that problem? Sounds easy, but it's not, okay? After that, we call press release. If we are now identifying that problem, in 18 months we've solved it, what are we going to say, right? What is your end goal? How you get there, what you do in the meantime, is all going to be driven by that end goal. We call it press release, frequently asked questions. That's an internal mechanism we use for everything, trust me, right? And it's really about a user-friendly means to speed up research and identify breakthroughs. Get to that cure, get to that mission that Michael and his organization are trying to get to, right? Then there's the who. Okay, we know the challenge, we know where we're going to get to. Who is going to be impacted by this, right? If you're familiar with software development, it's all about the why, the what, and the who. And in this case, the who are two different personas. The investigator, that researcher who is working on grant funds, right? Who's a student, who's a postdoc, who has a theory about specific mutations and how it impacts EB. And the other one is the patient. As you saw Eli up there, as a father of three myself, I can only imagine how desperate and what I would be willing to do to help my child if they're suffering through that every single day, right? How can we help the parents and the patients get the information and help that speed up that race for a cure? And then finally, the what. What does it mean to be successful? We can build cool websites, we can build all this data, we can focus on all these cool services and technologies, but if you don't have a core measure of success, how are you going to know if you're doing the right thing? Okay? So our process is, as you saw in that Working Backwards workshop, in about 6 hours, we sat down with Michael, we sat down with some of the leading EB researchers in a room, and broke down all of this in 6 hours to define what is our next 6 weeks going to look like. So what I want to try to do, again, not as cool as Eddie, but show you a quick demo of what we built in that 6 weeks to show you that this is not just theory, this is not just an architectural design. We have working, tangible code that Michael now has access to and is moving forward into the first release. Okay? So once this starts up, cool. So right now, as it starts, if you can see it, I apologize for the size, I am logging in as what we call the investigator persona, right? I am that researcher. I want to find patients across the world that fit a specific criteria that I can then run some analytics on. So in this particular case, we have about 10,000 patients, all broken down by different types, subtypes, genes. Do they have whole genome sequence files? Do they have cell files? Do they have primary cell files? Things like that. And you can break it down across the various areas for the patients. All of this information is controlled by the patient themselves based on what they want people to see. If I don't want you to see my zip code, we won't hide that from the researchers. If I am willing to give everything I have, you can have at it, free of charge, I can do that too, and anywhere in between. So as you can see, I'm quickly going down from 10,000 patients, selecting various types, subtypes, gene types, and it's going down to 400, eventually down to about 25 different patients. This is great, right? But as a researcher, I don't want to have to do this every time I want to run some code or I want to run some analysis. So how can I take this really focused subset of patients and save it for my next round of analysis? And that's when it rolls into what we call a study. This is just a traditional study. Things like titles, abstracts, introductions. You all are probably way more familiar with this type of work than I am, but focused on, what am I researching? Why am I researching it? What type of outcome am I going to try to come up with? And then I'm going to use that to further my research. See, the idea here is that not only can this study be used by this particular investigator, but maybe I want to share it with other people, right? Maybe I want other people to see the research that I'm doing. Maybe I want them to participate in this. Maybe a patient is part of this study and they want to follow it, right? I've written a new paper and they get notified of what's happening around that study. It's not just a data discovery platform, which we'll also see in a little bit from the patient side. We think it's more of a collaboration, almost a LinkedIn for EB research. That was the approach that we took and kind of the innovative approach that we took to connecting patients to these researchers. Okay? So once this study is ready, there you can see the 10 patients again, all filtered down by my specific criteria. I click next, and now we're logically grouping all that stuff under the covers. I'm not going into the details of the technologies. If you want to ask me later, I'm happy to talk tech on that. But the outcome is this logical grouping of patients for this particular case. Okay, that's great, but as a researcher now, what do I do? Do I have to download it? Do I have to set up compute? Do I have to manage all the storage under the covers? This is really where we see the capability of the cloud come in, where we have almost one-click access to unbelievable compute and tool scale. Okay? So once I go through all the various areas, the next thing I want to do is launch compute, right? It could be a Linux instance if you're technical. It could be SageMaker if you're into machine learning. It could just be a BI tool, or it could be some complex, GATK workflow if you wanted to. But in this particular case, we're making the researcher enabled to focus on their research, not the IT. One of the core assumptions we have is that these researchers, whether they're students, whether they're postdocs, whether they're graduate students, doesn't matter. They're not AWS experts. They're probably not technology experts. They want to focus on the research, not setting up compute and hardware. So we give them two-click access. This runs, does everything for them under the covers. Once it's up and running, they click a button, connect. It's connected to the students or the patients they just identified, and they're off and running. Okay? Now I'm switching into the patient. So this is a parent of a patient, an actual patient that says, I want to know what's going on in the world of EB. I am ready to contribute my data to this if I see fit. Okay? So whether it's myself as an 18-year-old who has my whole genome sequence, maybe I've got a variant file, I've got some medical records, I want to start participating in this. I want to share this with the world to drive the search for the cure, right? Location-based, where am I? I'll use my Dallas address there, right? Who am I? And the first thing that you'll see here is, okay, I know where you are. Are there any trials, clinical trials, or studies in your area? And immediately it shows me some trials near me, right? Maybe I don't know who the PIs are. Maybe I want to connect with them. Maybe I want to follow them, right? That social networking and collaboration and connection is all there. If I want to go even further and add medical information, simple as adding details about my type, my subtype, my date of birth. Again, all controlled under the covers. Right now, no researcher can search me until I physically go in and say that, right? Give myself some details, and then add specific files. So in this case, I'm going to add a VCF file, which is a variant call file, right? And then that VCF, if I permit it, will then be accessible by the researcher who just searched and found me. It's all, again, making it as easy as possible to get information to the researchers so they can do what they need to do on this low cohort disease. Right? And the goal here is, again, the files all stored in one place. I know nothing about compute. I'm not paying for the storage as part of Michael's model. They want to pay for the compute for the first customers that are participating in it. So you get free access to all these cool things and all these cool tools. All right? So that's it at that point. And then from there. All right? If you want to ask a bit more questions about the tech and how we do it after the fact, but I think we're going to hand it back over to Michael now for the next steps. Thank you.
So, in medical research, we're skeptical by nature, right? So I met Ryan and his team, and they said, we need you to write a press release of your vision from 3 years from now. We need to get everybody in a room. I was very skeptical. But I say, having gone through the process, what Ryan just showed you, Ryan and his team built that in 8 weeks based on constant calls and engineering on exactly what we wanted. So really what we're trying to solve is, today, if you're trying to find that great barbecue restaurant that many of you have not gone to yet, so you need to, you put it in your GPS, that GPS starts guiding you on a path. Why do we not have the same technology for patients? So if I'm a patient or a parent and I have a child with EB, how can we engineer something that is just what GPS is for maps for patients, except the right and left turns or the right treatment at the right time, finding the right doctor for your genomic subtype and your disease, and the destination, the final destination, is a cure. So I do want to leave enough time for questions. Ryan showed you exactly how the platform has been built. The vision is really, where do you get the data? So we're looking at data imports from 3 different sources. Number 1, I talked about the 20-member EB Clinical Research Consortium. They're now working on a 900-patient shared data set amongst 20 universities. That's a really big pillar that comes in. In addition, those universities in the consortium share EHR information, bioinformatic information. Number 2, and we talked about this morning, natural history studies. Some need to be created, some exist. So a big part of getting data inputs for this is corralling the landscape of data that exists in all of our diseases and trying to work and negotiate in the same way that we use venture philanthropy to get that data into your platform. And finally, what we think is truly the holy grail, going directly to the patient. As you heard Ryan say, and we did survey groups with many different patients, and we asked them, what sort of data do you want to provide? What data would you be comfortable with providing? If you are a patient or a family member of somebody with EB, you want to provide every single piece of data possible if it means moving quicker. So patients want to be involved with the data platform and the research. It's a really key pillar of what we're building here that makes this very different than other data initiatives. So then where does the data go? The first strategic plan for the model is that if you're a member of that consortium, remember we talked about incentives initially being financial. Well, in some ways, data is more powerful than anything monetary or any other value. So if you are an academic medical center and you're part of the consortium and you're putting data in, guess what one of the benefits is? You get to also see other universities' data. So if you play nice in the sandbox and you put data in, you can see the collaborative efforts of 19 other universities. It's our intent to share this data with industry and FDA to make the process of drug approvals move faster. And finally, to go back to the holy grail, for some reason we do these big data initiatives and these big data projects, but then everybody forgets to share the data with the patient. Why is that? We want to rapidly break and change that, where any patient that logs in, exactly as you saw from Ryan's demo, can see population health information, see patients like them, be connected, and Ryan called it a LinkedIn sort of way, to clinical trials based on their genomic subtype. The patient needs to be a key player in the same way that social networks are. So if you're interested in learning more about this, ebresearch.org/data. You can fill out a form to request more information and see how we plan to expand this into other rare diseases. And in conclusion, we can do all this. What does it mean? Why do we do it? What motivates us? It means no more pain. It means no more suffering. It means children with EB can walk and play and run just like other kids. It means that hours of doctor's visits and bleach baths and bandaging can be filled with adventures and vacations. It means a cure. So thank you, everybody, very much on behalf of all of us at EB Research Partnership. Thank you, Ryan and Vision Engineering, the AWS team. It's been really a godsend and a blessing for us, and we're here to answer any questions.
So if you could quickly do our poll first at datadiy4.cnf.io. Sorry, I had a call come through. Could you advance a slide? One more? Whoop. There we go. Look at it go. Looks like a lot of people are interested but don't quite have the capacity. We're hoping to fix that here. I'm just going to hold that so we can get a lot of questions answered. So Hira, maybe you can start with the first online question.
Sure. Okay. So our first question is, what centralized data platform do you use for the clinical centers? What was the funding incentive needed per center?
So the platform that's been used traditionally is something called RedCap. Maybe some people are familiar with it. Before AWS entered, that's what our universities used as a shared platform. Actually, AWS has a plugin with RedCap, so it makes the migration of data quite simple and fluid. An incentive is just purely a financial incentive. So it was a nominal amount compared to the bigger research projects that we fund, but a funding amount that went to each specific university with a contract of expectations on what it means to be a member in the consortium. So if we fund, you need to put data in, you need to put representational data in based on the patient population numbers that you serve. And if that doesn't happen, that's a discussion about membership in the consortium.
Oh, here we have a live question.
Yeah, could I ask a question related to that, Lucia Naderbeck from HNF? So how long did it take you from having the initial thought that let's build this platform to actually have it to where it is today? It's beautiful, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I give a lot of credit just personally to mentors and thought leaders in the space. I worked for, many of us know her, Kathy Giusti, Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, who was a patient leader. And early on, she was a great mentor to me to say data is really the solution. And if we can aggregate data together, industry will be interested, clinical trial development can happen much faster. But I think it's always been a motivation of mine personally just to see that patients were being left out of the equation with many of these data platforms. They were purely scientific and medical research and published data, and the patient's role was to give every form of fluid and biospecimen and then to hear some point in the future when a publication hit Nature. And that's wrong, right? No other technology do we use in that way. So I think it was a real hunger after working in pediatric disease for a long time and wanting to see data be used for the patient. Meeting Ryan and his team, I have to give him an incredible amount of credit because an idea is only as good as an idea. We as an organization didn't have the capacity to go build this vision and bring it into fruition. And not only did they provide, a technological solution and an innovation model, but, you heard Ryan talk. Him and his team shared a commitment to the mission. They learned about EB, the questions that they asked from researchers in the community. They really dove deep in. And we consider them, part of our team, part of our family that wants to cure the disease. So if it weren't finding Envision Engineering and Ryan, it would have been an idea that we probably would have slugged through. But to answer your last question about time, we started talking about this. They quite literally locked us in a room with patients, researchers, and our organization and said, we're not leaving here until we agree on a one-sentence problem, and the rest will be details, but we're going to all agree, everybody that needs to be participating in this as a stakeholder, be successful, we're going to all agree on this, right? And Ryan ran that workshop, did a phenomenal job, and then from that point, once that scope was identified, I'm from Kansas, I grew up on a cattle ranch. I always had this image of Ryan as a cowboy riding a herd of keeping everybody in the lines, because every time somebody would say, well, hey, it'd be nice if we can do this, Ryan would crack the whip and say, that wasn't the scope that we agreed to. Maybe that's good for phase 2, but let's stay laser focused on what we all agreed to. And they got that done in 8 weeks from idea and meeting to actually engineering this with that approach of well-defined scope, hearing feedback from all stakeholders, and then sticking to that scope. We talked on the phone, if not daily, at least every single week to keep this moving. So for organizations thinking about this, be prepared. I think our vision, and Ryan and I laugh about this all the time, is there's a pace of academia and there's a pace of Amazon, right? And we're trying to pull academia. It's never going to be all the way over here, but we're trying to pull it in that direction, but be prepared that as an organization, your executive leadership, everybody involved needs to be committed to running at that Amazon pace because, as Ryan mentioned, if you don't, bottlenecks happen, it slows down, and they simply just won't tolerate that.
Hi. I was wondering if you could speak a little more to the funding mechanism for the global platform. Is it free for researchers, and are there any limitations on what they can do, as you know, to fire up some of these cloud servers with the compute power to analyze, for example, genomics data can get quite expensive. If you could
absolutely. Yeah, it gets quite expensive quite fast. As an organization, it's a key funding priority for us over the next 3 years to build this out. So for researchers themselves that are part of the consortium using it, there will be no fee. The ask will be that they will meet incentives of patient targets and enrollment. So if you see 100 patients, your incentive might be 30. If you see 30 patients, your incentive might be 10, right? So setting targets that are not financial, the organizations can use it for free as long as they are participating as an active member of that consortium and a contributor of data. So yeah, we take on the funding expense as EB Research Partnership, and that's the intent. There's further economic models that could be explored, but we really wanted to get this piece right first, which is make sure that it works for patients and make sure that it works for researchers and make sure that neither have to pay for this service.
Hira, do you have a question online?
Yes, I do. So popular question right now, and I'm assuming this one's for Ryan. How does AWS make money on this?
How does AWS make money on this? So from our side, my team in our 6 to 8 weeks, we are an investment on behalf of AWS. Our goal is to show people who have those core challenges that think the cloud can help but aren't quite sure how to start, how our services, the building blocks we provide, can be used in a rapid, iterative manner with the right approach. So the outcome of our investment is that these new innovations, these new platforms, these new tools will be running on top of AWS, and then the traditional billing cycle goes along there. For things like Michael, there are ways around that with credits and other opportunities for nonprofits that are struggling in that area and want to maximize their use. But the real outcome is that we show people what's possible with AWS, solve this one particular problem, and once they get that better feel, it opens up a wider breadth of where they can move workloads into our cloud.
Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, Megan Golden from Mission Cure, focusing on chronic pancreatitis. Can you just talk about the process of getting patients and researchers on board? Because I imagine this type of thing is useful if there's a critical mass that are actually using it, and where are you in that process?
It's a very timely question. It's a daily process. It's a daily process. And I think the hardest piece is the same barrier we saw with venture philanthropy, is working with universities and tech transfer office to understand value takes an incredible amount of time. If this was up to us, meaning AWS and EB Research Partnership, every data source that exists in EB would be in this platform months ago. But it just takes an incredible amount of time and resiliency and toughness and follow-up. So it takes a long time. I can say we're actively in the process. It's easier to work with industry on acquiring data sets than it is with academia, in the same way that it's easier to work with industry on venture philanthropy than it is with academia, but both are really important to participate in a data set like this. For things like the CCOD, the 900-patient data set, it's something that we've been the sole funder of historically, so that makes those type of data sets easier when you're the one, in fact, that has funded them, and I think that's a good question and an important note for organizations to think about. There's kind of a couple different phases, like acquiring data that already exists, creating data that does not exist, and then allowing patients, going direct to patient, to create new data sources. So that's the way we think about it strategically, if that answers your question. Going direct to patient, we want to build the researcher piece first to make sure that it's clinically valid. But as soon as we open the doors for patients, then you have rapid data aggregation, because of the 500,000 EB patients in the world, I guarantee you a very large portion are chomping at the bit and ready to sign up and contribute for something that not only helps their disease but gives them real-time information and value. So that piece moves much faster, which is why it's been a big part of the vision.
Hira?
So can you share templates or resources for developing collaborative research agreements?
Yes, absolutely. And I know this has been asked before. I think one of the things, and actually Kristen, who's going to speak next, we've talked about at Milken and doing some workshops on how to think through agreements. The challenging thing is it's really unique to each university, and it's really unique to each disease, and it's really unique to every foundation. So a short way to answer is there's no, here's the template venture philanthropy agreement. There is a nonprofit called, I don't know if it's Venture of America. I'll find out and I can send it around, but they do have template venture agreements that you can get for free on their website. But I think it's helpful to know and be familiar with that. But really, the best way to answer that question is to find a good attorney that does this professionally, has experience. Because even our own contracts that we've been doing for 10 years, depending on the university, depending on the project, depending on the time, there's no standardization of template. They're different for each one, where I think puts the reliance and importance of having a really good legal team and a really good financial professional team, whether that's on your board or your staff or a partner, is really, really the key to success.
Sandra has a question.
Hi, I'm Sandra with the Lipoprotein Delay Foundation. Who owns the data within the platform, and how does the patient monetize their data?
It's a great question, and it depends on who you ask, on who owns the data. And I wish that wasn't true, but it is. And our viewpoint is that every patient owns their own data. If they contribute it, they own it, and they have a right to use that data in any way they would like. Now, depending on the state, depending on the hospital, depending on how it was collected, depending on the consent forms, it's a very complicated question, and I think all of us in this room know that. One of the ways that we're starting, and that's contingent upon the different data sets. Our viewpoint, generally speaking, is that if you're a patient, you contributed data, you should be used to control that data in any way that you would like. And I think that's why you see a platform that's patient-focused, patient-leaning, and giving data back to patients, because we feel that's the right thing to do. Now, part of data ownership becomes complex. And again, there's lots of policy being written right now on what that means. There's some states where if I, as a patient, go to my academic medical center and ask for my own data, that's a very difficult and sometimes expensive process, right? So very complicated question. I think what Ryan showed on the demo is very important, because what we're building to solve that very important question and problem is that when a patient logs on, you saw Ryan log on from the patient perspective, they are very clear on what they're consenting for and what they don't. And it happens multiple times, and it's a checklist, and we want to be very clear from a user experience that the patients know exactly what they consent to. So in essence, the direct-to-patient initiative is solving this very complicated problem of who owns whose data. We want the patient to not only have control and ownership of their data, but control and consent on who uses that and who sees it and how it's used. And we're using a technology solution to solve that important question.
Kira?
Yeah, we've got an audience question here. Tracy George, University of Utah. So I'm a professor studying mast cell disease. How do you vet the patient data? Because as a researcher, it's very important to me that the patient actually has the disease that they say that they have. So how do you do it on your platform?
It's a great question, and Ryan and I and the medical team have talked about this. And I want Ryan to answer this as well, but if you look at that demo that Ryan did, again, Amazon engineering a solution, there's a simple button where you as a researcher can say, I want to see all patient data in the system, or I just want to see clinical data in the system, which would exclude patient self-reported data, which I think is getting to the answer of your question. So we, in fact, drew a line that any researcher can do a simple check and say, I only want to see clinically validated, published data, as opposed to the patient self-reported. But if you would add.
No, you nailed it.
Monica?
Hi, I'm Monica Weldon with Bridge the Gap, SYNGAP Education Research Foundation. I had a question. You had mentioned that nonprofits, the whole idea around nonprofits are broken, about they're not running as a business. My question is you put, on your slide, you had 90% that went into research, so that means you have 10% overhead. Mm-hmm. So that besides the research, because our organization runs in a multi-pronged fashion, and where we have our database, we also do a lot of advocacy, we do Hill work, things like that. Mm-hmm. So do you run strictly on volunteers, or you have paid experts? How do you allocate that overhead cost?
That's a great question.
For employees.
Yeah, so for employees, I'll just give you, probably the best way to answer is to let you know my team, especially after hearing what we're doing, you'd be very surprised that it's 3 full-time employees. So it's myself, somebody that manages our database and donor thank yous and acknowledgement, and somebody that manages communication, social media, email marketing, and things like that. So believe it or not, there's 3 of us. We have a part-time senior accountant who's also somebody that lives with EB and is an ambassador to the community as part of our team and part of our staff. And we use a company for a part-time controller CFO position. So I think finding the positions that can be part-time, finding the absolute necessary positions. That being said, we're rapidly scaling and growing. I'm a strong believer that I don't think nonprofits should be limited to scrutinization over every single operational item. There's a great thinker, Dan Pelota, who many of you may or may not be familiar with, but I align myself with that viewpoint that if you believe curing EB is important, if you believe that curing rare disease is important, then those organizations should be allowed to hire the best people that command very high salaries to do the best work, because otherwise we're going to be waiting a long time to accomplish the missions that are incredibly important. So even though we are lean as an organization, to be very clear, I advocate for investing in the best people and the best staff to solve the most important pressing problems in the world. So we as a team are 5 people, 3 full-time, 2 part-time. However, we have 3 open full-time positions as we speak right now. So I think it's important to be fiscally responsible, direct a majority towards research, but I think that should never, ever eclipse hiring great people that can commit to your mission.
Hira, one more question.
Yes, we have a question from the audience here.
Hi, Mike Raleigh, SNGAP Research Fund. You didn't touch on how you handle the IRB or HIPAA compliance for this data, and as a tag on to the HIPAA compliance, if you take European data and how you deal with all the wonderful European data privacy laws. Just be helpful, because as we think about building something like you've done, and thank you both, this is incredible work, how did you tackle those 2 issues?
Yeah, it's a great, complex question, and Orion will have some insight as well. So for starters, the data that we have in the system, the cornerstone is this CCOD 900 patient data set. That's primarily US, so we don't have the EU complexity or problem. The project itself has been run by 2 pilot university IRBs. So we're in fact actively working with an IRB at the university level to make a protocol that could apply when we scale to the other 18 academic medical centers. So that was really important to us, and kind of goes to someone's question over here. We didn't want to do a direct-to-patient initiative until we had IRB protocols in process from universities that we are trusted partners in the space. One of the pilots is with the Human Genetics Institute of India. So we're starting to understand what that policy looks like, but we have not engaged with EU and their policy. And on HIPAA compliance, Ryan will give you more insight there, but we want primarily to use de-identified, not patient-identifiable information in our platform. We want the patient-identifiable information to be kept at a university level. Still make sure the platform is HIPAA compliant, but again, just to be clear, because that changes the way that we look at consent laws, right, if it's identifiable or not. So it's our intent to make the platform primarily de-identified in the early stages.
So, Ryan, I'm sorry, but
no worries.
So if you're de-identifying, that means that you and the brain trust at Amazon, and I say that sincerely, have cracked the code of duplicate entries. Like you've got some universal identifier, and there's no risk of one patient showing up twice. Like if my kid's been to 3 universities and you're de-identifying it inbound into the database, what are the risks of that patient showing up again and again?
I mean, there's always a risk. There's no 100% guarantee that we would deduplicate it. That's the best answer I can give on that aspect of things. But for going back to if I can, the HIPAA question, within AWS we have what we call our shared responsibility model, which means that we at AWS are responsible for security and compliance of the cloud. Our customers are responsible in the cloud. So all the services that we use to build this platform are HIPAA eligible. They're not compliant, they are eligible. Once we build up these services, it's up to Michael and his partner in our professional services team who are building out the next level to make sure that they go from eligible to compliant. All right? So we built everything ready to go for that process, but in our 6-week, 8-week engagement, we're not going to get full HIPAA compliance. That takes 8 weeks, 12 weeks in some cases, right? So we focused on getting in there, proving the technologies, but with that long-term goal of HIPAA compliance. So everything we use is HIPAA eligible. It's now them going through the final checklist to make sure that it is compliant.
And just to be clear, that's where IRBs become incredibly valuable on turning eligibility to compliance. So that's the strategy that we've taken. And certainly happy to chat after, because that's a key question. And there are some groups that I'd be happy to share that are using blockchain technology to take de-identified records and find consistencies to link them when you're having data come from different places. So again, when you build on a cloud AI machine learning based platform, you can bring in these individuals that have technology companies that do that. And there's several that use blockchain to link and identify a key to a record that can be merged when 2 data sets come together.
Thank you, guys. Thank you,
Cool.
Ryan and Mike.
Thank you.
Ryan and Michael for everything. Thanks so much. Really powerful presentation. We are over for a break, and we've gone through a lot of material already this morning and a lot of questions. So we're going to take a very shortened break so that we can stay on time. It'll be about a 5-minute break before we keep going with a very key concept that we've been hitting on several times now, which is around collaborations and managing them. So thank you very much.